Thanks, Dr. Smith. Can you hear me all right? Does that sound good? All right, so just a little background. I got started in kind of learning about managed grazing when I started my master's back in the 90s, early 90s actually, so that puts a little bit of age on me. But every time we go through this managed grazing, we start thinking about the Merrill system, the Savory system, and all these other systems that some of you probably have read about. Every system can be applied in some degree, and then you need to take a little bit of time and make adjustments for your own farm. Dr. Grove went through, one of those foundational things, start with the soil types. If you're looking at leasing land or buying land, that web soil survey is extremely valuable to sit down and look at what the potential productivity is going to be for forage production. And so we're going to go through a few things here this morning, and then we're going to jump through the math, and you'll want to make sure that you find this sheet. I think it's under section 3, but you'll need this sheet, and we're going to work through this sheet before we go out to the field to set up your paddocks. A couple of definitions: animal unit month, and this is used a lot with NRCS when you talk to them about setting up grazing plans. Back in the 50s, I believe, an animal unit was set at 1,000 pounds. And essentially that was meant back then to be equivalent to one mature cow and a calf. Our animals have gotten much bigger, and so today we figure a mature cow weighs about 1,400 pounds. And so when you think about it from that perspective, we're thinking about 1.4 animal units per cow. Everybody clear with that? Then for mature sheep, it used to be, I think, 5 ewes. Would have been equivalent to 1 animal unit, which was about 200 pounds. Today, some of our sheep, the Katahdins and those aren't as big as what some of our meat and wool breeds used to be, and so they may be a little bit lighter, and you need to think about some of those as you make those adjustments for the equivalent weights. Essentially, an animal unit month, then, is the amount of time or forage that is going to be available to support that cow-calf pair for that 30-day period. And so Dr. Groves went through the web soil survey. When you get into some states and some soil types and you look at productivity for pasture, it will give you a number of animal unit months. And so as an example, one soil may have 9 animal unit months. Another soil may have 7 animal unit months. Which one then would be a more forage producing type of soil? 9 animal unit month soil type or a 7 animal unit month soil type? Got to speak loud. I'm a Hard Rock era kid and sat on a tractor, a 4020, brush hogging a lot of pastures that had no exhaust. We straight piped that sucker because it was cool, but now I can't hear crap. So what was it? 9, right? Yeah. So 9, that higher number, means that you're going to get roughly 270 quote-unquote grazing days, right? And so when you think about that as 1.4 animal units on a mature beef cow, that 9 is going to give you roughly 6 months of grazing, okay, for a calf pair. And so when we start talking about this, we generally say, as a rule of thumb, it takes roughly 2 acres for a decent grazing season per cow. All right? And that doesn't include your winter forages. So now your winter hay's got to come from somewhere else. And that will vary depending on, like Dr. Grove said, your soil type, your precipitation, your forages, and all those things. Okay? So I just want you to kind of think about that and how you can tie into that web soil survey. That is an extremely valuable tool that's really underutilized. Stocking rate. Stocking rate is defined as the pounds or, in some instances, the number of animals per unit of land for a given period of time. If we're thinking about the entire year, we would define that stocking rate then as the carrying capacity. Okay? If we're thinking about a 3-month window, then we start looking at, well, that's going to be a stocking rate because it's a decent period of time, but it's not the entire grazing season. So the longer period is usually used when we start thinking about, I just bought a farm. How many animals can I run on it? And so then we're looking at that carrying capacity because we want to know that whole year cycle. Stocking density is a snapshot in time for a single period. You'll hear people talk about 1 million, 2 million pounds to the acre. And that's in a lot of your popular press articles, but very, very rarely do they give you the time frame at which the animals are on that piece of land. If you put 2 million pounds of animals per acre, you are not going to leave them there very long. All right? Because they will have everything trampled, eaten, and gone in hours. So I just want you to understand when you read some of those what stocking density is. As an example, if I had 40 cows that weighed 1,400 pounds on a half-acre strip because I was strip grazing on my stockpile fescue in the fall, the stocking density would be 112,000 pounds per acre. Capiche? Everybody good with that? These are realistic numbers, and we will see those. But then when you step back and you start thinking about it, that's an area of 32 feet by 32 feet for one cow. So wrap your head around that when you start thinking about how much space and how much forage you're going to give to them in a 32 by 32 area. When you all go out to your fields and you set up your paddocks later this morning, I want you to be thinking about that when you set out your runs and you set out your little paddock and say, oof, is that going to be big enough? Is that going to be too big? All right, and so that's where the grazing math kind of comes into play for us to help think about how much area to actually provide our animals for a given set of time. So we mentioned this already. The carrying capacity really is the stocking rate that both economically and environmentally can support your group of animals or your type of animals for the full grazing season. I think Adam would agree, and I know Adam has said this before, and probably all the NRCS staff in here would agree with this, that generally speaking, we tend to see overgrazing as our major primary issue. And so I see a lot of heads bobbing. And so with overgrazing, you know, we've got a lot of grass maybe right now that looks like this, and we hate seeing that. But then you roll around like last year when we got really dry in June, and we've got nothing. And it's better to go ahead and let this grow and stockpile this for those dry periods later in the year when we don't know what the actual productivity is going to be because we don't know what precipitation we're going to get from week to week to week. We're what, an inch and a half behind average right now. We've had an extremely dry April. Grasses have been stalled. And so you're trying to plan for those kind of abnormal periods. If you don't make adjustments, you're going to overgraze, kill the plants, and then you're not going to have anything but weeds that are less desirable when you get into July and August. I'm not going to go through this. This is here for you to work through some math later on, okay? So when you get home tonight or you get out a week or two from the grazing school, this is just an example that you can kind of go through and run some numbers and make sure that it makes sense through your head on how we do some of the grazing math. I want to try to rotational graze. So the next thing is how big of an area that we need for the paddocks, and that's what this exercise we're going to do. These are the things that you'll need to know today. This is the things you'll need to know when you go home and start thinking about setting up your grazing schools, your grazing paddocks. How many head am I working with? What are their weights? Average weights are fine. We're not trying to get down to the actual pound, get an estimate. They're going to change through the season. The estimated intake is a percent of body weight, and I'll go through that tomorrow when we talk about meeting the nutritional needs. But as a general rule of thumb for beef animals, and it would catch kind of the lower intake of sheep, but 3% of their body weight on a dry matter basis is a good rule of thumb for intake. 3% is going to catch most of our forages early in the spring. It may drop down to 2 to 2.5% as they mature, but then when we get back up into the fall on good lush regrowth, it'll bounce back up to 3% again. So 3% of body weight is a good general rule of thumb for dry matter intake for a lot of our animals. You'll need to have a rough estimate of available forage that's out there, like Dr. Smith mentioned. You know, we're not going to utilize all the plant, okay? Remember, you want to leave something here to capture sunlight so that the plant can regrow and start back. If you scalp them all away all the time, in my neighbor's yard, I don't know that I don't think I could find a mower that would kind of mow it down any closer without completely getting dirt. But he's already got no grass because we've been dry in April, and he scalps it every week, and I'm leaving mine at 4 inches, and mine actually still looks decent. It's the same behavior mindset when you're going out there with grazing. If you scalp it down all the time, when you get any type of stress like drought, there's not going to be anything that comes back very quickly. So try to keep a little bit of residue. Available forage then is something we can measure, and Dr. Smith will show you that out in the field, how we can measure available forage out there. How long do you want to leave them in? You need to think about the labor you have and the time that you can get out there and move animals. The percent utilization of the forage then. The general rule of thumb we talk about is take half, leave half. In other words, we want to take half of this dry matter away. If you've got 2,000 pounds to the acre, we're going to take off 1,000 into the animal and leave 1,000 behind. So the take half, leave half is kind of a general rule of thumb. There are times of the year when we don't want to follow that rule. If we're in December and we're grazing stockpiled fescue, we want to take 70 to 80% of that, because if we don't use it, we'll lose it. It begins to die off and wilt and turn brown, and so we lost any of the value, because cattle really don't like to eat that brown stuff. All right? So there are some general changes to that as we move through. Paddock numbers are important. Anybody ever heard of regenerative grazing? Yeah. Regenerative grazing is just managed grazing that allows the plant time to rest and recover and regrow and regenerate itself, right? And then that has bigger implications on soil health, microbes in the soil, etc. But a key component on it is making sure there's sufficient rest for the plants before you go back in and regraze them. Generally speaking, in a pasture system, this time of the year, think about your yards, within 4 days of you mowing, you're going to have sufficient regrowth on your yard, right? And that sufficient regrowth then is going to be clipped off by the animals in your pastures this time of the year too, and they may not have had sufficient time to build root reserves up. And so usually in the springtime, we can get by with fast rotations versus July and August when it's hotter, drier. Those plants need more time to recover, and so you've got to be flexible when you move. And that has to do with your paddock numbers, to give sufficient time for rest. I've fixed width of 45. This is dated. I need you all to remember 35 feet. Write it down on this little sheet. Up in here under the paddock width, I have 40. Each school we do is a different location, and we have different widths that are available. But on this sheet, your fixed width is 35 feet for your paddocks. All right? They're not going to be any wider than 35 feet. Dr. Teutsch and the crew's already got them staked out where you're going to go. If you get into your neighbor's paddock area, we're going to charge you rent. Okay? Just remember that fixed width is 35 feet. All right. Then you've got everything else, or I'm going to give you everything else that you'll need to solve. So in the table up here, you can ignore this, but you'll have this information in your table, and we've got to assign you to some groups, okay? And so what we're going to do is we're just going to go around and we're going to calculate how much forage we actually need, okay? So this is where we're going to jump into. Let me check my time. All right? So everybody get this sheet out. Go ahead and grab it out. I think it's in section 3, isn't it? All right. And I'm going to assign groups. And all we're going to do is we're going to count off. Okay? So, Carolyn, you're going to be number 1. That's going to mean you're in group 1. So when you look on your table, whatever number you get counting off, then you're going to come down in the table here and find under the heading for group, that's your numbers you're going to use. All right? Joe's 2.
3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Oh, 1, back to 1.
4, 6.
Stop. Write down your group number. Because we'll forget by the time we get from here to the pasture, right? All right. And there's a reason we like to count off, because we want to break people up. 8. 8. Nope, back to 1.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Back to 1. 1. Adam's out. Back in the corner. Back to 1. You two back there? They're cooking. Okay. Everybody's got their group numbers in, right? Okay. Bear with me. Get your phones, smartphones, and all that out, and we're going to work through these. I'm going to give you an example, and my numbers won't be exact because you're going to have to pull in information from your own group lines. Now, you are dealing with mature cows and not heifers, okay? And your mature cow weight is 1,400 pounds. So under the table, where I say that the heifers weigh 800 pounds, your mature cows on average are weighing 1,400 pounds. Under number 1, I have a blank, and it says 1 animal weight in pounds. Everybody see that? Write down 1,400 pounds, or 1,400. You will have 2 animals in your paddock to maintain overnight. So then the number ahead is 2. All right? The percent dry matter intake as a percent of body weight, everybody has the same, which is 3. So then you write down 3. So that's the dry matter intake as a percent of body weight. We've got to convert that 3% to a decimal. And so that's why I have divided by 100 behind that. Do y'all see that? So when you take, remember this, when you take 1,400 pounds times 2 animals, that's 2,800 pounds. You're going to multiply that by 3 divided by 100, or 0.03. Okay? You're going to only be in there for about 3/4 of a day. They've already grazed this morning. Okay? The majority of the grazing bouts are sunrise, sunset. They've already got their fill this morning, so you're going to have about 3/4 of a day. So you're going to write down 0.75. That's the number of days you're in a paddock. If I was at home, because of our traveling, I know that I'm only going to be able to move the cattle on Saturday, then my grazing days would be 7, because I'm going to move them every week. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's what the days in the paddock stand for. So here we're doing 3/4, 0.75. What then do you come up with when you multiply all those across? So 1,400 times 2 head times 3% times 3/4, 63 pounds of dry matter forage needed for 2 animals for 3/4 of a day. If you did a full day, it would be like 84, 85 pounds. All right? Everybody good? All right. So now what you do is you jump down to step number 2. And Brittany went out and she sampled the paddock areas, and she estimated that above, she clipped down to 2 inches, that above 2 inches there was 1,700 pounds of dry matter per acre. Now we're in the spring, and I want to leave a little more residue than 2 inches. So we're going to drop that back down 200 pounds because there's about 200 pounds of dry matter per inch. We're going to leave 3 inches. So your available forage from 3 inches up is 1,500 pounds of dry matter to the acre. Right? So that would go underneath this where it says available forage pounds of dry matter per acre. Just put 1,500, and then that's going to be your first blank in number 2 is 1,500 pounds of dry matter to the acre. And Ray can walk around if anybody needs help, and we can help you out. Everybody good? Got it? All right. Your utilization rate comes from your group number in your table now. Each of you have a very different utilization target. Anywhere from 40% up to 80%. 80% would be like that stockpile strip grazing situation. Could be like a mob grazing situation where we really want to trample it down, take it off, whatever. So pull in your number from your respective line in your table for your utilization rate down here. Could be 40, could be 60, could be 80. All right, that goes in that second blank. And again, we've got to convert that to the decimal form, so we're going to divide it by 100. I used an example of 50%. Take half, leave half. So as an example, if I had 1,500 pounds of dry matter times 50 divided by 100, I came up with 750 pounds of dry matter per acre available to be taken and grazed by the animal. You all should be somewhere in the ballpark of 600 to 800, maybe 9.
Multiplying 1,500 times 0.4, 0.6,
0.8. Yep, exactly, Dr. Smith. Everybody good?
Where did you get the 1,500 pound standing forage dry matter per acre? Like, is that like a standard, like if I want to use this on my specific farm?
Fantastic question. Where do we come up with that estimate for forage that's out there? And Dr. Smith is going to go through that and we'll show you how to measure those. We'll use clippings. So we'll take a known area, like 1 square foot area, and we'll clip it, we'll weigh it, we'll dry it, and then we know how much was in 1 square foot, and we know there's 43,560 square feet in an acre, and we can do the math and come up that way. I had an argument in front of a group of producers in Maine with one of my colleagues, and I made the comment that, grazing management has a little bit of art. He called BS on that. He said it's all mathematics. He said, you can calculate all this stuff. I said, yeah, to a certain extent, but you never know how big of a crap a cow's going to have and how much she's going to defecate on forage and not eat, right? Those things make the art kind of come into that. But we had a good argument in front of a group. All right, so come up with numbers. Double check. Yell them out. 40%ers, what'd you come up with? 600. 80%ers, what'd you come up with? 1,200. Good, you're all right on the money, okay? Notice how we made those math numbers too to make it kind of easy. All right, so what you then are going to do is you're going to skip down here, and you've got your actual 63, 64 pounds that you're going to have in that group for 3/4 of a day. You pull that number down into number 3A. That's 63 pounds of forage dry matter needed by the 2 cattle that you have. And then you divide that by your estimated utilization rate that we just talked about. So that's whatever 600 to 1,200. You throw that in down there at the bottom. And that is pounds of dry matter available for grazing per acre. When we divide the dry matter needed for the cattle by the pounds of dry matter available, dry matters cancel out and we end up with the acreage that you need. It will be a decimal point. It will not make sense to you that it's like 0.1 maybe. But again, it's 2 cows for 3/4 of a day. That's it. So you should come up with a point maybe 0.8 to 1 point or 0.11, somewhere in that ballpark. And that's okay. What'd you come up with? 63 divided by either 600, 63 divided by maybe 1200. 0.105. 0.07 for the 1200, right? Yep. Everybody's okay? You're not coming up with like 200s, something like that, right?
What did you come up with for those of you that are 60% utilization?
0.91. Is that what it was?
We came up with 900, right back and forth.
Yep. So take your pounds that are needed by the group, which was 63, and move that down to 3A, and then divide it by 900. What'd you come up with? 0.07? 0.07 for 900. What'd you get up for the 1200? 0.0525. So think about it. As you have a bigger number for forage available, it should take less land to support them. Make sense? All right. Any other questions on that? Everybody's got their 0.05 to maybe 0.1, what in that range. That's going to be down here at the bottom. That's your acres needed. It's a very small amount of land. We're talking 3/4 of a day. Flip it over. Okay? So there's a line here at the top, and that's going to be the square footage. Okay, so the equation on the bottom here then is your 0.05 to 0.1 divided by the square feet that's in an acre, which is 43,560. Oh, sorry, multiply. Multiply. I'm looking upside down. Multiplied. So be sure that you come and multiply 43,560 times 0.05, 0.07, 0.9, and you're going to come up with somewhere probably around 3,000 to 4,000 square feet. Everybody good? Anybody lost? Raise your hand if you're lost, because we're here to try and go through this. You're lost. All right. So multiply that through on your phone. So 1,400 times 2. And then times 3, which would be divided by 100. Yep, that's 0.0. That's 84 times 3/4. Oh, that messed up there somewhere. So you had times 0.03 times 0.75. There you go. So that's 63. And then that number, you just follow right down through and put there. And then here, this is 1,500. Yep. That's our adjustment. And then your utilization rate you pull in from your line. Yep. And then so 40 divided by 100. And then multiply by 1,500. We measure that in the field, and so you'll learn that when we go out to the field. Mm-hmm. Nope, not yet. That's, yep. And then so copy that down there. And then you just do this equation. 63 divided by 600. Oh, redo that. It didn't clear out. 3.105. And that zips down there. Multiply by that. Yep, nope, that's why we're doing it. And then that goes right up top. Okay, you're welcome. So we got everybody caught up. You should be somewhere around 4,000 square feet. Now, you have a fixed width of 35 feet. And we're in the luxury of being able to make a perfect rectangle or square.
Not 40 in your chart, it's 35.
It's 35. We had to narrow them down to fit them in. So take your square feet then that you figured. Okay, that goes into 4A. And then 35 is going to be your set width. So take your number of square feet, say it's 4,000, and you divide it by 35, which is your width. That's going to give you your length of your paddock needed. Okay? So you're probably going to be somewhere close to 100, 120, maybe 140 feet. Could be less if you got a really high utilization number. So take your square feet. The beauty when we do a kind of square foot, it's length times width. So you've got your square feet that you needed, 4,000, somewhere in there, divided by 35. What did you come up with? Shout out some numbers. 87s. Got to holler. Remember, I'm half deaf. 65. 130. All right. There is roughly, in the average walking pace, 3 feet. So if you had 87, you could fudge that to 90, right? And then you know that you need to go 30 paces to get 90 feet. If you're at 120, you need to go 40 paces, right? It's that easy. Everybody good with that? So now what you can do is you can write up here your paddock length is going to be your 90, 100s, 120s, whatever. So you're going to set your pasture up to be X long by 35 and come back and make a perfect rectangle. Everybody good? Everybody's okay? All right. That's grazing math. You can double check your math if you want. So the way you double check then, put your length in there that you calculated. And remember, we're going to the farm. Round it up, round it down, however you want to do it. If it's 107, go to 105 or 110. Make your life easy. Multiply your length times your width. You should come up with the same decimal point that you calculated then at the very bottom of the first page, given a rounding error. Okay? I've given you another example down here at the bottom that you can go back through home later and calculate and go through.
This is a grazing period for 3/4 of a day.
This is exactly correct, Joe. That is the amount for 3/4 of a day because they've consumed their morning bouts already now. By the time you get out there, they're going to have roughly 40% of their daily intake already achieved. Anything else?
So if we have a utilization rate that we determine at 80, then when I look in this chart that you covered, we're looking at, to achieve that, you have to rotate 2 times a day or so to get that utilization.
Exactly.
And we're close to that. You're 0.75. You know.
Okay.
So the goal, and maybe to follow up on that, the goal of the demos, if it works out right, Dr. Smith, when we go out tomorrow, if you had a 40% target utilization rate, hopefully you'll have about this much gone. If you had an 80% target utilization rate, hopefully about this much of it's gone. If we did everything right and our estimates were correct for available forage out there. It may not be exact because your small section of area may just happen to have more weeds that they don't like to eat. Or it may be a little thinner than the areas that were sampled and clipped in the whole field. So when you go out there and you look at your little paddock area, you may need to think, I need to make an adjustment, make it just a little bit shorter because it's really good and really productive, or I've got to make it a little bit longer because there's a lot of weeds and there's some bare spots where they fed hay, something like that. That's that art part of it, making adjustments.
In terms of that utilization rate, again, what you were just speaking of, if that 80% is what they eat, 20% of that is, where does trampling and that kind of stuff?
Yep, that's where it's coming in. So we always, at this time of the year, we'd like to leave 3 to 4 inches of residual for solar capturing and rapid regrowth. And then you're going to have trampling in that percentage and that. So when we're at 80%, we would never recommend 80% typically in this time of the year. That's more in that fall stockpile. And we want to get all of that off because I listened to Dr. Teutsch and he said I should be thinking about frost seeding clovers in February. I'm going to take that biomass off so that seed can get down to the soil and germinate. Make sense? All right. I got one quick other thing that Dr. Teutsch asked me to go through. And I'm on everybody. Oh, good. On your phones, Dr. Teutsch asked me to have you download the Kentucky Forage tool. Open up your browser, whether it's Safari or Google or whatever that might be. And in your search bar, I want you to type in KY space forage space tool. And then do your search, and the very first thing that comes up should say the Beef Forage Supplement Tool, University of Kentucky. Did you all find that? It's KY space forage space tool. And it should come up, the very first thing is the Beef Forage Supplement Tool. Anybody having a problem, hold your hand up and Dr. Teutsch or Dr. Smith will come around. If you click on it, it's going to have a picture of a cow, hopefully. Looks like this. And then what it'll say is that you'll get this note, and it'll say install this web app on your phone if you want. You don't have to, but you can install it and it'll always be there. Now this app is not downloadable. It's just a link to the URL when you've got that on your phone, so it quickly opens the web application up. You need to have cell phone service or internet service for this to work. Kevin Laurent later is going to go through a forage test and how this tool will calculate supplement needs for a given hay test that you have for different stages of cows, mid-gestational, lactating, etc. So we wanted you to have this on here. You got decent internet cell service here before we go to the field. Everybody good? All right, so lastly, be flexible. I'll give you an experience. When I was up Wisconsin, where's my Wisconsin colleague? So I spent several years in Wisconsin before coming back down to home. I was looking at fescues, and so we were looking at some novel new fescues that the breeders were developing, and they asked us to test them for resiliency under grazing. And I was grazing them hard. And I had an experienced grazer come to a field day to see it, and he said, Lehmkuhler, you're running this pasture on fumes. And he said, what's going to happen when you run out of jet fuel in the airplane? It's going to crash. And what he meant by, as soon as we got a little bit dry, it was going to crash. And so, but that was the purpose. We were testing it, and we were really high stocked. First year went great. Second year, we got into about the first part of July, and it got dry and hot, and guess what happened? The system crashed. Okay? We went from running about 40 animals on a field down to 6. Okay? You have to be flexible, and you have to reduce animals as you need to, because if you don't, what's going to happen? Is going to be a dust bowl. It's going to be erosion. It's going to be these other things. So just understand that also you don't always have to do the Lehmkuhler model of stressing the plants and be at maximum utilization of what's growing. It's okay to have a little bit out there. All right? If it gets dry and hot, they will graze it off just like it was hay that was stored, right? It's not the end of the world. It may not be the best quality, okay, and they may not perform very well, but there's something out there for them to eat other than dirt. So be flexible. All right, Dr. Smith, I'm done.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.